On my 69th birthday, my son handed me a stack of medical bills and said, "We thought you'd be gone by now." That was the moment. Not loud, not even sharp, just final. I'm Margaret Ellis, 69, and that was the moment I knew they had let me go long before I was ready. Subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Thanks. It was a Tuesday. The kind of gray day that makes you forget whether it's spring or fall. I'd spent the morning baking a small lemon cake, my mother's recipe. I only made half the usual batter, knowing no one was coming. Still, I lit a candle, just one. Not for the year, for the fact I was still here at 3:47 p.m. The doorbell rang. David, my oldest, stood in the frame, looking rushed, like this was an errand. His daughter stayed in the car, headphones on, gum snapping. He came in, set a manila envelope on the counter without a hug, without a happy birthday, and said those words, "We thought you'd be gone by now." He said it like he was explaining a budget miscalculation. Inside the envelope, statements from a facility I had never agreed to go to. My name signed at the bottom of a form I didn't recognize. I didn't speak. I couldn't. He waited for something, maybe gratitude, maybe permission to leave, and when I gave him neither, he said, "We can't keep carrying this, Mom." Carrying what? A life, a woman. He left after 6 minutes. I counted. The candle had melted into a soft yellow puddle by then. I let it burn down to nothing. I stood in the kitchen and watched the taillights vanish down the curve of the cul-de-sac. I remember thinking how clean everything looked, the sky, the road, the silence. That's when it began, not the pain that had been living in me quietly for years. No, what began was the noticing of how invisible I'd become, and the noticing, too, of how very much I had given, all while fading. I don't think anyone ever plans on disappearing. It's something that happens slowly. Under the weight of repetition and the softness of sacrifice, you give, and you never quite notice when the giving becomes your identity. It's quiet, like fog gathering in a valley. One day you look around and you're not in the life you remember. You're in a role, a function, a container for other people's needs. I married young, 19. James and I were a quiet pair, a good match by our mother's standards. He had steady work at the post office, and I had a calm nature. We moved into a modest home in Hendersonville, North Carolina, on a street where all the mailboxes leaned a little left. The house had blue siding and a crooked porch swing that James promised to fix every summer, and never did. By 21, I had David. Then 3 years later, Emily. I remember the day she was born, May 17, 1983. A storm rolled through the mountains like a warning. And when I held her in the hospital window light, I whispered, "You'll have a different life than me." I said it out loud. I thought if I said it enough, maybe it would be true. My life, even then, had begun to turn into a pattern of caretaking. I worked part-time at the elementary school cafeteria, so I could be close to David. Then Emily. I packed lunches in brown paper bags with notes scribbled in ink that always bled, "Proud of you. See you at 3. Love, Mom." I kept track of every fever, every field trip, every bedtime prayer. I braided Emily's hair every morning until 6th grade. I folded James's socks in pairs, even when he left them on the floor, even when they started staying there longer and longer. The thing about small sacrifices is that they stack up. Not in a dramatic, movie-ending kind of way, but like water collecting behind a dam. It doesn't seem like much until something shifts. I remember once when Emily was 10. She had a project on constellations. She'd forgotten about it until the night before. I stayed up with her until past midnight, cutting out stars from silver foil, ranging Orion's belt just right on a navy blue poster board. She got a B+. She told her teacher she did it herself. I didn't correct her. I never did. When David totaled his first car, I used half of the savings I'd tucked away from sewing commissions to help pay the deductible. I didn't tell James. He would have said we needed it for repairs on the roof. He would have been right. We had pots catching rainwater in the hall closet that spring. I ironed clothes for church every Saturday night, even when no one went but me. I sat alone in the second pew and prayed for things I couldn't say out loud. For peace, for health, for somebody to see me still standing there. Birthdays were always remembered. I'd make each of them their favorite meal. David loved meatloaf. Emily preferred pot roast with potatoes that fell apart on the fork even. After they moved out, I'd mail cards with gift cards tucked in. Handwriting growing shakier over time. They never said much in return, a text, maybe once. Just an emoji. When James got sick, I slept in a chair beside his hospital bed for 9 days straight. I spoon-fed him ice chips and read him psalms he barely heard. He passed on a Tuesday morning at 6:12 a.m. I remember because the nurse came in with a tray of breakfast right as his monitors flatlined. Eggs and toast, the smell of it still turns my stomach after the funeral. I cleaned the entire house alone. People came by with casseroles and warm condolences. But no one stayed long. Everyone has their own grief, I suppose. I washed his clothes, folded them, and gave them to Goodwill a week later. The man who picked them up said, "These are in good shape." I nodded because they were. I tried to stay close to my children, but they began to speak to me like I was something old-fashioned, a recipe they never had time to make. They had jobs, lives, children of their own. I understood. I made space. I offered to babysit, to help. With school pickups, sometimes they took me up on it, but more often they didn't. I was told not to worry about it. I was told to just relax and enjoy my time. But what do you do with time when it's no longer requested? When all the skills you spent a life refining, nurturing, cooking, knowing the right temperature for someone's bath are now just skills no one needs. I kept the house tidy. I learned how to use online banking. I paid bills on time. I stopped dyeing my hair. I stopped waiting for the phone to ring. When Emily went through her divorce, I sent her a check for $3,000. I had to move money from a savings bond James left me. She didn't say thank you. Not because she's ungrateful, but because, I think, she expects that I'll always understand. And I do. That's the problem. Understanding became my way of surviving. I forgave 100 thoughtless moments before breakfast. I excused missed calls and broken promises. I told myself they were busy, that they were doing their best. I believe they were. I still do. But believing in their best doesn't mean I didn't bleed quietly for decades. The truth is, love makes you a shapeshifter. You become whatever they need: a warm lap, a listening ear, a background character in the family photo. You crop yourself out so they can shine brighter. And then one day, you realize you've left no trace of yourself in the room. I didn't ask for applause. I didn't expect parades. But I did think there'd be presence, a sense that, even if I wasn't essential anymore, I was at least remembered. Not for what I did, but for who I was, for who I still am. The lemon cake I baked this year was the same one I made for David's 5th birthday. He smeared it across his cheeks like war paint back. Then, I have the photo somewhere. He was smiling. I was holding him. You could see it in my eyes. I believed, deep in my bones, that motherhood was forever. Now, I wonder if forever just means until you're no longer useful. But I'm not bitter. That's not what this is. Bitterness is too loud. This is quieter than that. It's a quiet that comes after you've told your story 100 times and no one's listening. So you stop telling it. That birthday, the one where he handed me those bills like a passing chore, I didn't cry. I didn't slam any doors. I just stood still, and in that stillness, I heard something I hadn't in years, myself, a soundless voice saying, "You're still here." And maybe that's enough for now. But I knew something had changed, a crack, maybe, or the first thread of a seam pulling loose. I didn't know yet where it would lead, but I knew I wasn't going to keep patching the fabric alone. I washed the cake plate. I turned off the light, and for the first time, I didn't send a thank you text to say how nice it was to see him, because it wasn't. And I wasn't going to lie about that anymore. There's a certain kind of loneliness that doesn't look like loneliness from the outside. It doesn't weep or shout or knock things over. It folds towels, checks the mail, refills the bird feeder, and smiles politely in the checkout line. It shows up to everything uninvited but never disruptive. Like the sound of a refrigerator humming at night, constant, dull, and inescapable. That's the kind of loneliness I came to know in the years after James passed. It didn't arrive all at once. It came in slow, familiar ways. It came with silence on Sundays. The space beside me in the pew stayed empty. I kept looking over expecting to see his slouch, his wide shoulders, the way he cleared his throat during long prayers. I still caught myself whispering to him sometimes. Old habits. I suppose he was the last person who really noticed me in a room. The house, once so full of movement, began to echo differently, not just with quiet, but with absence. The kitchen, where I used to step over backpacks and lunchboxes, now stayed pristine, no fingerprints on the fridge, no muddy shoes at the door. I should have been grateful for the clean floors, but they made me uneasy. Like a museum waiting for visitors who never arrived. The phone rang less and less at first. It was just missed days, Monday instead of Sunday. Then it became every other week, then only when something was needed. Can you pick up Emma from practice? Could you send over your tax forms? Do you still have the recipe for your carrot cake? That's how I became a utility, a keeper of documents, a recipe index, a storage unit for seasonal guilt. The thing about emotional abandonment is that it never announces itself. There's no grand confrontation, no dramatic scene, just a slow dimming, a subtle shift in the air. One day you realize you're not part of the circle anymore. You're orbiting it. Like a planet that used to be central, now demoted, still there, still real but unnecessary to the system. I began to catalog these small abandonments. Not on purpose, not at first. But they collected themselves in me like driftwood on a shore. The time Emily canceled her lunch because her boss needed her last minute. I said I understood. I meant it. But when I saw photos later of her at brunch with coworkers smiling, mimosas in hand, I felt something sink in me, not anger, just weight. Or when David brought his family through town but didn't stop by. He posted photos from the Overlook just 15 minutes from my house. They all looked happy. Wind in their hair. Not a thought of me in the caption. I left a small heart under the photo. He didn't reply. That one stayed with me for weeks. Silly, maybe, but it did. There were birthdays missed, not all at once, but the cards got later. Then forgotten. Last year, Emily sent me a message the day after. Sorry. Yesterday got away from me. I told her it was fine. I said, it's just another day. But it wasn't. It was the day I brought her into the world. A day I had nearly bled to death. A day I had always honored for her. Now, it floated by unnoticed. I stopped planning holidays after a while. Thanksgiving used to be my masterpiece. I'd wake at 5 a.m., basting the turkey, making rolls from scratch, setting the table with cloth napkins. 1 year. No one confirmed until the morning of. David called at noon to say they weren't coming. Emily texted around 4. Sorry, kids are sick. I sat down with 2 plates and a full table. I still lit the candles. I couldn't help it. There were also the ways they began to edit me out. They'd talk about plans without including me, then act surprised when I asked, "Oh, we didn't think you'd want to come." Or, "It's mostly younger people." Or, "We figured it'd be too much for you." Always with that half smile. Like they were protecting me. But what they were really doing was replacing me softly. Without ceremony. When Emily bought her new house, I found out from a mutual friend at church. She said, "Isn't it lovely? You must be proud." I smiled and nodded, and later that night, I stared at a photo of the house online. White shutters, a wraparound porch, no room for me. Sometimes it's what they don't say. The way they don't ask how you are. Not really. They ask about your blood pressure, your knees, your prescriptions, but they don't ask about your soul. They don't ask what you're dreaming about, if you still dream at all. That's the thing. I used to dream. I used to imagine a small beach house, maybe in Beaufort, with wind chimes and salt air. I imagined rocking chairs and morning coffee with someone who asked about my stories, not just my symptoms. But eventually you stop dreaming, too, not out of bitterness, just practicality, like winter coats packed away in May. You forget how they felt on your shoulders. There were other small hurts, a forgotten Mother's Day, a new family photo where I wasn't included, a grandchild school play I didn't hear about until weeks later. I stopped asking for details. I started pretending I already knew. It was easier that way. Even the physical things began to reflect my erasure. My favorite chair was taken to the curb by mistake during a garage clean-out. "We didn't think you still used it," David said. That chair had been my reading corner for 22 years. They used my house as storage. Boxes in my garage, decorations they no longer wanted, old clothes. I became a holding place for their pasts, while my present shrank smaller. And the worst part of it is how good I got at saying it was fine, how practiced my smile became, how easy it was to say, "Don't worry about me," while standing in the same room I used to feed them in. Love doesn't disappear quickly. It decays, slowly, silently. And when you love someone, you let them forget, if it helps them feel lighter. But it doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. These weren't dramatic betrayals. No one shouted, no one slammed doors. But I felt like a painting, hung in a hallway that no one walks through anymore, still there, but faded, passed by. And the truth was, I began to forget myself, too. I started skipping my own meals. What was the point in cooking for one? I stopped buying flowers for the table. I stopped replacing light bulbs right away. I moved less. I laughed less. I kept the television on more, just for voices. It wasn't depression, exactly. It was more like a soft ghosting, not from the world, from the people I built my world around. And when David handed me that envelope on my birthday, when he said what he said, it wasn't the beginning of the pain. It was the confirmation, the quiet, brutal confirmation of everything I had already suspected, that I was no longer in the frame, just a name on the paperwork, and something in me began to pull back, not with anger, but with clarity, like a tide that knew it was time to recede, because the hurts had added up, 100 little ones, and I knew there would be more. But I also knew finally that I didn't have to keep standing in the same place, waiting for them to see me, not anymore. There was a moment in every quiet undoing where the silence hardens, where it shifts from resignation into resolve, I think, for me. That moment came in early February of last year, during one of those brittle southern winters where the cold feels like more of an inconvenience than a season. The trees were bare but not beautiful, just exposed. I had gone out that morning to pick up my prescriptions and a few groceries. I remember the list: bread, coffee, eggs, dish soap, cat litter. Simple things, things that said, "I'm still trying." I still made lists even when my days were nearly identical. It gave me a sense of shape. When I came back, there was a white SUV in my driveway. I didn't recognize it. I remember thinking maybe it was a neighbor's guest. But when I pulled closer, I saw Emily's husband, well, ex-husband, technically standing beside the open trunk, hauling boxes out of my garage. I parked and just sat there for a moment, watched him lift an old lamp, a sewing machine, and what looked like one of James's toolboxes. He wasn't in a rush. He didn't look guilty. He looked like someone collecting what was already his. When I got out of the car, he smiled like we were running into each other at the post office. "Oh hey, Margaret," he said. "Emily told me to come by and grab a few of her things. Things that had been sitting in my garage for years, untouched, gathering dust. Things I'd asked about more than once whether she wanted me to donate them, sort them, store them elsewhere. She always waved me off, just leave them. She said, we'll deal with it later." Now, apparently, later had come, and she'd given him my key. I didn't say much, just nodded, walked past him slowly. My hands were shaking, but not from the cold. I don't even remember putting the groceries away. I stood in my kitchen for a long time, staring at the counter, listening to the quiet thumps of movement from the garage. It felt like being robbed in slow motion. But politely, with permission, they left after 20 minutes. No goodbye, no thank you. The door to the garage stayed open a crack, letting in a line of cold air. I didn't close it. I just stood in it like I needed to feel how far the warmth had gone. The next day, I went to check my mailbox and found a large envelope from a law firm in Charlotte. I thought maybe it was a mistake. I opened it at the kitchen table with a cup of lukewarm coffee. Inside was a notice of property transfer intent, co-signed by David, my son. Apparently, 2 months earlier, he'd initiated the process to move the deed of my house into his name for asset protection. It said, in anticipation of future care needs. There were documents bearing my signature, but I hadn't signed them at first. I thought it must be an error, a mix-up, surely. Someone had forged it, accidentally typed the wrong name. But when I called the number listed, the assistant asked, "Is this Margaret Ellis?" And I said yes. And then she said, "Great, we just need a final confirmation from you." I hung up. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake in the dark, trying to track it all in my mind. Every time I replayed it, it got worse. There was no accident, there was no confusion. David had used old copies of my identification. He had access, of course, and signed on my behalf. The worst part wasn't the fraud, it wasn't even the betrayal. It was the tone of it, how businesslike it all was, as if my life, my home, my history were items to be moved around on a spreadsheet. James and I had paid off the house slowly, month by month. It took us 18 years. We ate beans and rice the summer James's hours were cut. I clipped coupons. I patched socks. I made it work. I made it home. And now, it was being reduced to a bullet point under estate planning. I didn't tell anyone. Not right away. I needed to hold it in my own hands first, to let the truth settle. Some part of me still hoped it would vanish, that I'd wake up and it would be a misunderstanding. But it didn't vanish. In fact, a week later, I found a document tucked into a drawer in the guest bedroom, one of those drawers I hadn't looked through in years. It was a power of attorney form, signed and notarized, dated during a time I'd been recovering from a fall the previous summer. A fall that kept me loopy on pain medication for nearly a week. They'd done it then, while I was in bed, arm in a sling, drifting in and out. That's when they'd made me sign. I felt a hollowness I can't describe. Not rage, not grief. Just a floating kind of emptiness, as if the floor had been gently pulled away. And now I was just drifting above the life I used to trust. I went outside and sat on the porch steps. The winter sun was low, sharp. I watched the squirrels chase each other around the oak in the front yard. For a moment, I pretended none of it had happened, that James was still inside, watching the Weather Channel, that Emily was bringing over banana bread, that David was at work, calling me later just to check in. But pretending got harder the longer I sat there. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a line crossed, the kind of line you can't uncross. It wasn't about the house, not really. It was about the message underneath it, that they had already made plans for me, that they had decided I was on the way out, and they were just managing the cleanup. They didn't see me as a person anymore. I was a file, a risk, a burden to be arranged around. That night, I walked through the house with a notepad. I started making a list, not of chores, not of groceries, but of everything that was still mine. The small things. The brass lamp in the hallway James bought from an antique store in Asheville. The ceramic bowl my grandmother gave me when I turned 25. My sewing scissors, my books. The only photograph of me as a child. I made that list like someone anchoring herself to the ground. These things didn't matter to them, but they mattered to me. And then, quietly, I made another list. A list of what I would need to leave, not because I was ready to go, but because I finally accepted they had already let me go. And now, it was my turn to choose what leaving would look like. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't scream or demand explanations. That's not how I've ever handled pain. I come from a long line of women who learned to endure in silence, who stitched their heartbreak into throw pillows and swept their betrayals under the rug between vacuuming and the evening news. So I didn't yell. I went quiet. It started slowly. I stopped answering calls that came after dark. I didn't reply to Emily's texts about school pickups or David's emails about paperwork updates. I didn't refuse them. I just let them linger unread. I became like a lamp no one could find the switch for. I pulled back from every corner I'd once filled. There was a relief in it I hadn't expected. Like taking off a coat I'd worn too long. I stopped pretending I wasn't hurt, and instead of arguing or explaining myself, I just let the silence speak. I spent my days differently. I cleaned, but not for anyone else. I sat on the porch in the late afternoons and watched the wind move the pine trees. I read old books I'd already read before, ones I knew by heart. I made meals I liked, ones no one else would have eaten. I didn't tell anyone about the papers, about the forged forms or the transfer attempt. It felt too raw, too humiliating to name. I wasn't ready for their faces, not their guilt, not their justifications. I didn't want a performance. I wanted peace. And to be honest, I wasn't sure I could trust what they'd say anyway. Once someone rewrites your role in their life without telling you, It's hard to believe their words have weight. Instead, I started writing things down, small things, thoughts that floated through during the day. I filled a spiral notebook, the kind with a cardboard cover and a soft blue line down each page. I wrote about the shape of quiet, about how mornings felt without expectation, about the sound of the mail slot clicking at noon, and how I still hoped every day that maybe a letter, a real one, would come. But they didn't send letters, just text bubbles and forwarded links and rushed voicemails that always began with sorry. I meant to call earlier. I let them pile up. Messages that ended with question marks I never answered. Eventually, the call slowed. The messages stopped repeating. They gave up, I suppose, or moved on. That was when I knew I was doing it right. Silence, I learned, is not just absence, it's presence turned inward. It's attention reclaimed. I had spent so many years listening outwardly, listening for signs of what they needed, what I should give, how I should fold myself smaller to make room for their lives. Now, I listened inward, and I heard things I hadn't in decades. One morning, I stood at the kitchen sink rinsing blueberries and realized I was humming. Not for anyone, not to soothe a child or entertain a guest, just a sound, soft and automatic. A rhythm I hadn't noticed was still in me. It startled me. I stood there, dripping hands, and felt something rise, not joy exactly, but memory, of a version of myself that once hummed without apology. I started walking in the mornings, early, before the school buses ran. I'd take the same loop through the neighborhood past the vacant lot with the bend stop sign, around the hill where the old water tower peeked through the trees. The air felt different when I didn't have anywhere to be. My pace changed. I began to notice things. How the dew collected on the grass, how the robins showed up in twos one morning. I passed the edge of the old elementary school where I used to work, and I stood for a long time by the chain-link fence, watching children line up in pairs. I didn't know any of them, but I watched anyway. I thought about how many times I'd held a small hand across that same lot, and how none of it had ever made the news. How invisible a life of quiet service could be. I went home that day and called a lawyer. Not for revenge, not to start a war, just for truth. I brought in every paper, every form I could find, the forged ones, the power of attorney. I explained it all in a voice so calm the young paralegal kept glancing up, like she was waiting for me to crack. I didn't. I spoke like someone giving a weather report. This is the temperature. These are the winds. They told me what I already suspected. The documents were suspicious. Possibly illegal, at minimum, unethical. There was a chance to reverse things. But it would take time and quiet. I agreed. I had nothing but time. And I had finally learned the power of quiet. While they worked behind the scenes, one kept moving in stillness. I sorted through old boxes. I donated clothes I hadn't worn in years. I took down the family portraits that had begun to feel like fiction. I bought a small safe. I moved all my essentials into it, my ID, my will, my deed, my father's watch, my mother's locket. I started asking questions at the bank. I set up new passwords. I rewrote my will, and I didn't tell anyone. It became my little rebellion, not in anger, in protection. One afternoon, I watched a spider spin a web across the corner of the kitchen window. I didn't brush it away. I watched it work for nearly an hour, thread by thread, completely unaware anyone was watching. There was something holy in that, a reminder that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it weaves quietly in the light. That was how I began to heal, not loudly, not publicly, but steadily, silently, and with each day, I reclaimed something. Not what I had lost, that was gone, but something else, something older, more mine. A kind of knowing that cannot be taken. And that was the beginning of something I hadn't felt in years. Power? Power doesn't always look like strength. It doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it shows up as a different kind of movement, subtle, unseen, a shift in how you carry your own name. That spring, I moved differently, not physically. Not at first. I still lived in the same house, slept in the same bed, stirred sugar into the same chipped blue mug. But inside, something had turned. I was no longer waiting for anyone. The lawyer had confirmed what I needed. The forged documents wouldn't hold. I had the originals. I had my name back in ink. It would take 6 months for everything to be cleared formally, but it would hold. David's little maneuver with the property title wouldn't stand in court. He had no idea I knew. And I didn't tell him, not because I was playing games, but because I no longer needed to. Silence had done its work. Now it was time to build. I started with small things. A new lock on the front door, a fresh coat of paint on the mailbox, which had been rusting since winter. I changed it to a deep green, my favorite color since I was a girl. James always liked blue, so that's what we had. But he wasn't here anymore, and I didn't need to pretend. I called a handyman to take down the heavy drapes in the living room, let more light in. I bought new ones online, soft linen that shifted with the breeze. When I hung them, the whole room felt different, like it had exhaled. Then I made the biggest decision I'd allowed myself in years. I opened a new account at a credit union across town. I moved the majority of my money there, quietly, cleanly. I left just enough in the joint accounts to keep up appearances. Enough that, if anyone peeked, it wouldn't raise a flag. It wasn't spite, it was sovereignty. I hadn't touched James's life insurance for a long time. Some of it had gone to help David during that rough patch after his second job layoff. Some helped Emily with the down payment on her first home. I never expected repayment. That wasn't how I loved. But what was left I tucked away. I drew from it now with careful hands. I researched, I asked questions, I took a financial planning workshop at the library, me and 7 other women, most of them widows. We didn't speak much, but there was a recognition in the room. All of us trying to navigate a map we hadn't drawn. And one morning, after oatmeal and the newspaper, I did something I never imagined. I called a realtor. Her name was Tony. She had a kind voice and no perfume, which I liked. I told her I wasn't ready to list anything yet, I just wanted to know what the house was worth. She walked through each room, nodded, asked quiet questions. I didn't tell her the full story, just enough. She looked at me toward the end and said, "It's a good house, but sometimes we grow out of even the good ones." That sat with me. A week later, I drove out to a small development on the edge of town. Not the shiny new one by the lake, a modest place. Townhomes with front porches and wide sidewalks, a community garden, a lending library on the corner shaped like a redbird house, children's drawings taped to the inside glass. It was peaceful, and most importantly, no one knew me there. The unit I walked through was simple, 2 bedrooms, laid-wood floors, a sunroom off the back with windows that caught the evening light just right. The kitchen was smaller, but it didn't matter. I wasn't cooking for crowds anymore. I didn't decide that day. I didn't rush. I just drove home and sat with the possibility. In the days that followed, I found myself moving through the house differently, not wistfully, not mournful, just with sharper eyes. What would I take? What could I leave? I started sorting, not out of bitterness but preparation. Because here's the thing about reclaiming your life. It doesn't come with applause. There's no certificate. It happens quietly, in how you walk through your own hallway, in how you fold a towel, in the way you unlock your front door and feel like the person stepping inside belongs again. I made a call to the utility company, told them I wanted the accounts fully in my name, just mine. No shared access, no oversight. The woman on the line paused. "You sure?" she asked. I said, "Yes, I am." The next morning, I had a locksmith come by. Then I wrote letters, one to David, one to Emily, not angry letters, not cruel, just clear. I told them the house was staying in my name, that I was aware of what had happened, that I would not be pursuing charges this time, that my finances were no longer their concern, and that, for the time being, I needed space. I told them not to come by. They didn't, not then, and in that space they left. I filled my days with intention. I joined a local book club. I didn't speak much the first few meetings, but by the 3rd I brought lemon bars. I started baking again, not to impress or provide, but because I enjoyed the smell of cinnamon in my kitchen. I went to a community lecture on Appalachian folk music. I even danced just one song, barely a sway. But it was the first time I'd moved like that in years. I went to the doctor and asked questions, real ones. I got a second opinion on the arthritis in my hip. I started taking a gentle yoga class. My balance got better. I walked without holding on to walls. One afternoon, while weeding the front flower bed, A little girl on a pink scooter stopped and pointed. "Are those daisies?" I smiled. "They are. They're my favorite," she said before scooting off. That night, I planted more daisies. I didn't make an announcement to the world. I didn't post anything. But I was changing. Slowly, grounded now not in what I had been to others, but in what I was reclaiming for myself. I looked at the for sale sign I tucked into the garage corner, still leaning, waiting. I hadn't called Tony back yet. I didn't need to rush. Because for the first time in a very long time, the choice was mine, and I was remembering how to choose. It's funny what people notice once you're no longer available. Not gone exactly, just withheld. I didn't vanish from their lives. I simply stopped offering my presence, like a coat rack always standing there, always ready to take the weight from their shoulders, and without me holding the corners, their little tents began to flutter. It started with Emily. She texted a week after I sent the letter, short, tight, no greeting. "Are you really doing this?" I didn't respond. 3 days later, I told Matt to handle it. I didn't know he took things still. I said nothing, not to punish, but because I had no interest in shaping her conscience. If there was a wound in her, it was hers to tend. I had patched too many over the years. Wounds I didn't create but was still expected to dress. David's reaction was more subtle. A few weeks after my letter, he called 3 times in a row. I didn't pick up. Then he emailed, subject line blank, "Can we talk?" Then a follow-up, slightly sharper, "You can't just ignore us." That one made me pause, not for long, but long enough to sit with the weight of that sentence. They'd ignored me for years, quietly, thoughtlessly, like a faucet left dripping in a house they didn't live in anymore. Now, suddenly, silence was an offense, but I kept it, because the truth is, their lives had been propped up by my unspoken labor for longer than they ever realized. It showed in small cracks at first. I heard from a neighbor that Emily had missed 2 days of work because she couldn't find childcare when the school had early release. I'd been the one to fill that gap before, showing up without complaint, waiting in the carpool line with a bottle of water and cheese crackers for her youngest. No one ever thanked me for that. It wasn't malicious, just expected. I imagine, that week, when she scrolled through her contacts, my name stared back like a locked door. David, I learned, had been trying to refinance his house, but the bank flagged the property claim because of the forged paperwork. The transfer had been reversed, just as my lawyer said it would be. But now there was a record, not a criminal charge, but a question, a mark on his application. He called twice after that, left one voicemail. "Mom, I'm sorry, okay, this is getting out of hand." I deleted it because it wasn't out of hand. It was finally in balance. The absence I left wasn't loud. It didn't break anything, but it revealed how much I had been cushioning. Their lives, like insulation behind the walls, never seen, but essential. Birthdays came. I didn't send cards. Mother's Day passed. I didn't enter the door. There were knocks, eventually. David once, Emily twice. I watched them from the window, both standing awkwardly on the porch like visitors at a stranger's house. They didn't knock for long. I think they expected me to open eventually, to return like I always had, with warm tea and soft excuses. But those days were over. I wasn't angry. I was done pretending that their love was something I had to earn. And in the stillness that followed, I found something I never expected. Peace. True peace. Not the kind you barter for with silence, but the kind that comes when no one is taking from you anymore. I planted a small garden in the backyard that spring, just a few raised beds, tomatoes, zucchini, a row of basil. I hadn't gardened in years. James used to do most of it. But I found my rhythm. Early mornings, hands in the soil, listening to the birds trade stories. One day, a woman from the book club walked by and waved. She had a soft lilt in her voice and asked if I wanted to join her for tea sometime. We sat in her sunroom and talked about books and aging, and how many women go invisible before they're even old. I told her a little of what happened, not the details, just enough for her to nod knowingly. "You're not alone," she said, pouring more tea. I believed her. Meanwhile, my absence settled into the bones of my children's lives like an echo. They couldn't trace. They had grown so used to me bending, smoothing the rough edges, covering for their lateness, forgiving the forgotten dates, that when I stopped, Their own gaps became more visible. Emily called the house line in late June. The recording picked up. My voice still steady from years ago. "This is Margaret. Please leave a message." She left a long one, said she missed me, that she wished we could reset things. Her voice cracked toward the end. I could hear the fatigue behind the words. I didn't return it, not out of cruelty, but because I had nothing left to offer on the terms they were used to. If there was to be anything again, if then it would have to be new, not built on the old scaffolding of assumption and guilt. And I think they knew it. I stopped checking the mailbox every day. I let it rest. I let myself rest. I no longer made space for the idea that love had to look like sacrifice. Somewhere along the way, they had confused access with intimacy. They thought because they could reach me, they still had me. But what I gave them, my time, my listening, my quiet endurance, was never theirs by right. It was mine to give, and now mine to withhold. There's a power in being missed that doesn't come from revenge or resentment. It comes from finally honoring your own absence as sacred. And while they scrambled to adjust, I flourished quietly. I joined a walking group on Tuesdays. I took an online art class and painted something that made me feel 12 again. I made soup from scratch and froze portions for myself, just me. No place settings waiting. No one forgetting to say thank you. I got a card in the mail in July from Emma, David's daughter. Just a drawing of a son and the words, "I miss you, Grandma." That one I kept. Because children don't lie. Not the little ones, not yet. And I may write her back one day, not with stories about what happened, but with a recipe. A pressed flower, a memory of who I used to be when love was easier. But for now, I am letting the silence do its slow, good work. Because they lost something when I stepped away. Not just a helper, not just a mother. They lost the person who held the map, who remembered the details, who forgave everything, even when it wasn't asked. And I don't say that with pride. I say it with clarity, because clarity, it turns out, is the gift you get when you finally step outside the frame and look at the full picture. And what I see now is simple. They lost someone who loved them beyond reason. And I lost the version of myself who thought that was enough. There are things a voice can't hold. Things that don't find their way out through conversation or silence. They live too deep for sound. That's why I started writing letters, not the kind you send. The kind you fold carefully and tuck away. Letters to no one and everyone. Letters to versions of myself I had buried to keep others warm. I didn't plan to write one that morning. It was late August, the kind of day where the air feels like paper, dry, thin, almost weightless. I had been going through an old cedar chest at the foot of my bed, just sorting. There were blankets from James's mother, a pair of baby shoes I couldn't remember keeping, and one of David's school drawings to stick figures under a sun. Labeled me and Mommy. The M's were drawn like mountains. I set it aside. And then, without thinking, I pulled a piece of stationery from the top drawer of my desk, one with a faded lilac border, and wrote a single line at the top, to the woman I was before they stopped seeing her. I didn't stop writing for 2 hours. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't even sad. It was a kind of shedding. A long exhale after holding your breath for too many years. I told her I remembered her. That even though they didn't, I did. The woman who stayed up mending torn jeans at midnight. Who made birthday cakes shaped like animals because her daughter wanted a pony but in frosting. The woman who held her husband's hand through chemo, even when he forgot her name at the end. The one who sat in parking lots between errands just to cry where no one could see her. I told her she hadn't disappeared, she'd just been buried. Under duties, under expectations, under the softness people confuse for weakness, I wrote. You loved like a lighthouse, quiet, unmoving, always shining, even when no one looked back. I told her I was sorry for how I had let others decide her worth, how I had confused usefulness with value, how I had participated in her own erasure by always saying, "It's fine," even when it wasn't. Then I told her what she had missed. I wrote about the mornings on the porch with a mug of coffee, and no one asking for anything, about the flowers growing wild in the backyard because no one told me where I could or couldn't plant anymore, about the laughter that had returned, not frequent, but real, the kind that starts in the stomach, not in the throat. I wrote I am becoming someone again. Not who you were. Not who they made me. But someone new, someone true at the bottom. At the page, I signed it with my full name, Margaret and Ellis, and for the first time in years, it felt like it belonged entirely to me. I folded the letter in thirds and slipped it into an envelope. I didn't seal it. I didn't know what to do with it at first. I left it on the table next to the lamp, where the evening light hit it just right. It sat there for 2 days. Then, on the third evening, I took it outside. I lit a small fire in the backyard fire pit James had built from bricks and cement and stubbornness. I sat beside it with the letter in my lap. The wind was gentle. The sky was pinking at the edges. I took one deep breath, then held the corner of the envelope to the flame. It caught quickly. I watched it curl and darken and vanish into smoke. I didn't cry. There was nothing left to grieve, just something released, returned the next morning. I felt lighter, and not the way people say when they throw things away. This was different. This was like finding a room in your house you didn't know existed. And in that room was a chair just your size, a light just your shade, and silence that didn't accuse but welcomed. A few days later, I found another letter, waiting in my mailbox. A real one. It was from Emma. Handwritten, a simple page. She told me she missed me, that her teacher had asked them to write about someone who made them feel safe. She wrote about how I used to braid her hair before piano lessons and let her lick the spoon when we baked banana bread. She said, "I don't know why everyone's so quiet lately, but I hope you're okay." At the bottom, a little heart with my name. Love? Grandma. I folded that letter carefully and tucked it into the book I was reading. Between pages 84 and 85, a quiet place where the story was still unfolding. I haven't written her back yet, but I will one day, when I'm sure I can give her the truth in a way that doesn't carry my sorrow into her small hands. That's the thing about letters. They hold what our voices can't. They outlive our moods. They tell the truth we were too tired or too tender to speak. I still write them sometimes. To the woman I used to be. To James. To my children, not the grown ones who forgot me, but the children I once rocked to sleep. The ones who believed I could fix anything. Who looked at me like I was the whole world. I tell them I love them more than they'll ever know. That I still do. But that I finally learned to love myself too, and I tell them it's not the end. Not a severing, just a change in wind, and if one day they're ready to come back, not to the version of me they took for granted, but to the woman I've become, I'll be here. But not waiting, never waiting again, only living, only loving in ways that leave me whole. My days now are simple. I wake when the light touches the curtains, not when an alarm or a name calls me from sleep. I stretch slowly. I water the basil in the window box. I move without urgency. Some mornings I write, some I don't. Some mornings I sit with my coffee in the little sunroom I've claimed for myself, and just listen to the creaking bones of the house, to the faint rustle of birds building lives in branches I can't see. There is comfort in this rhythm, nothing grand, but steady, mine. I never imagined I'd find peace this late in life. I thought, for a long time, that peace belonged to people who were finished, who had their families around them, their grandchildren at their feet, who smiled at long tables on holidays. I thought peace was noisy. I thought it required witnesses. But the truth is, peace is not performance. It's not what people see from the outside. It's what settles in you when you stop contorting to fit into someone else's idea of love. My porch faces west, so I sit out there most evenings. The sunsets aren't dramatic, just soft gold fading into purple. Sometimes the breeze carries the scent of cut grass or barbecue from a neighbor's yard. I watch the light shift on the street. I notice things now I never had time for. A girl practicing cartwheels on her lawn. A boy chalking a city on the sidewalk. A stray dog that visits the corner twice a week at exactly the same time, as if he has somewhere to be. I nod at the dog. He never notices, but I do. My life is made of these moments now, small ones, intimate in their ordinariness. Inside, I've rearranged the furniture. It may not seem like much, but it's a quiet revolution. The couch no longer faces the television. It faces the window. I spend more time looking out than looking in. I keep fresh flowers in an old teapot on the table, not because anyone will see them, but because I do. That's enough. I've learned that being alone isn't the same as being lonely. Lonely is a feeling of being unseen in a crowded room, of offering parts of yourself that are never held. I lived in that kind of loneliness for decades, while everyone assumed I was fulfilled, alone. Though that's something else. Alone can be sacred. Alone can be where you meet yourself, without apology. I walk most mornings. I've grown familiar with the rhythm of my own feet. I carry no headphones, no distractions, just breath and earth and time. Last week, I passed a woman sitting on her porch, knitting. We exchanged a smile, nothing more. But in that smile was recognition, to women who had survived the slow erosion of being needed without being known. Sometimes I wonder if my children think of me now. I imagine they do. Maybe not daily, but when the car breaks down or the soup doesn't taste right, when the silence in their own homes feels heavier than usual, I imagine they look at the phone and wonder if I'd answer. I haven't blocked them. I haven't erased them. But I released a version of me who would have answered on the first ring. They are grown now. They are learning the shape of me in my absence, not the shape of their mother, the provider, the peacemaker, but the shape of Margaret, the woman with a name and a spine and a softness that should have been treated like something rare. A part of me hopes they understand that one day, not for my sake, but for their own. Because I've seen what happens when people assume love means permanence. That no matter how many times they neglect or override or forget, the person who loves them will always be there, always waiting. But I'm not waiting anymore. I'm walking, I'm reading. I'm humming to myself as I fold the laundry. I'm here. The small town home I moved into sits near a library in a park. Every Saturday, I walk to the market down the road and buy a loaf of fresh bread, some strawberries if they look sweet, and a bar of dark chocolate I savor over the week. I talk to the woman who sells the honey and the older man who plays a banjo near the fountain. They don't know my story. They don't need to. There's a freedom in being known only as you are now, not as who you've been or who you served. Some nights I write letters I never send just to get the thoughts out. I don't cry often. When I do, it's not grief anymore, it's release. Like rain falling from a roof that's already been repaired, and yes, sometimes I still miss them. I miss the sound of Emily laughing in the kitchen, the way David used to rest his head on my shoulder as a child. I miss a version of us that once existed before life cracked things open. But I don't long for them to come back to what was. If they ever come, they'll find someone new. And if they don't, I'll still be whole, not because I don't feel, but because I finally feel everything I was taught to ignore. My peace is not loud. It does not demand attention. It's in the way I care for things now, the way I press my linens, the way I light a candle just for myself, the way I stand barefoot on the cool tile floor and breathe in the morning. I've built a life that doesn't center anyone's approval. That, more than anything, is a gift. I've planted things, watched them bloom. I've spoken to strangers who looked me in the eye and saw a person, not a role. I've listened to my own voice long enough to believe it again. So, if you're listening to this and you felt erased, overlooked, replaced, I want you to know something. You are still here. You can still begin. You do not need their permission. You are not too late. My name is Margaret Ellis. I am 70 years old and my life is quiet now. And that's enough. I wasn't angry. I was finally empty, and that was beautiful. If they ask about me someday, my children, their children, maybe even someone further down the line, I wonder what story will be told. Will I be a name said softly at holiday tables, my absence a passing mention? Or will I be the woman in the photographs they pass around in silence, wondering when things changed, and how they didn't notice it happening? Sometimes I imagine David standing in the kitchen of his home, years from now, telling Emma something about me. Maybe she'll ask why we stopped seeing each other. Maybe he'll shrug, say, she got distant, or she had her own life. He won't lie exactly, but he won't tell the full truth, either, because to tell it would require him to feel it. And Emily, maybe she'll stumble upon one of my letters one day. Maybe she'll find the one I wrote and tucked into a recipe book, the handwriting careful, the paper folded neatly between carrot cake and chicken pot pie. Maybe her hands will tremble a little. Maybe she'll read it twice, even 3 times, and wonder when I became someone she had to rediscover. They may tell themselves I changed suddenly, that I cut them off, that I became hard, cold. They might not understand that what they saw as withdrawal was, in fact, the quietest form of self-rescue because I didn't leave them. I left the version of me who allowed herself to be erased. I don't know if they'll ever see the difference, but I do. And that's enough. I think often now about legacy, not the kind in a will or a property deed. That's paper. Signatures, logistics. I mean a real legacy, how someone remembers. The way you made them feel when the noise was gone. I used to think my legacy would be my sacrifices, the way I bent for others, the way I showed up, no matter how empty I was inside. But sacrifice doesn't last, it fades. People forget what you did for them if it came too easily. Now I hope my legacy is this, that I remembered myself before it was too late, that I chose to live, not just survive, that I taught someone, somewhere, what it looks like to choose peace over permission. I don't expect statues or even full stories, but if there's a moment years from now, when Emma is grown, standing in her own kitchen, folding her own child's laundry, and something small and soft reminds her of me, a scent, a recipe, a phrase I used to say, I hope she feels calm. I hope she smiles. I hope she knows I loved her completely, even in the distance. Sometimes love is louder in absence. Sometimes it's in the boundaries we hold, not just the ones we cross for others. My neighbor passed away last month, Mrs. Tannen, from 2 doors down. She was 82, lived alone. Had a bird bath in her front yard that she scrubbed every week, rain or shine. I never knew her well, but I admired her steadiness. The day after her funeral, her granddaughter came by and stood on the porch steps for a long while. She didn't cry. She just stood there, taking it in. I watched from my window, unseen, and I thought, maybe that's enough to have someone come stand in. You're quiet after you're gone, to feel what remains. I've started preparing small boxes, one for each grandchild inside. Little things, a letter, a photo, a recipe card, a pressed flower, a sentence that mattered to me. Not now, not yet, but for later when their lives are noisy and they forget how to be still, when they wonder who they came from, when they need softness that doesn't ask for anything in return. It's not about being remembered perfectly. It's about leaving a trail back to something gentle. Last week, I found an old cassette in the back of a drawer, one James recorded for me in 1987, when he was on a work trip to Ohio. His voice is scratchy, full of static, but I heard him say my name. Maggie, he said, I miss you. He hummed a little tune at the end, off key, but tender. I sat there in the dark and let it play twice, just to feel my name in his voice again. If anyone asks about me someday, I hope someone tells them I loved like that, quiet, steady, without spectacle. That I left behind more than recipes and check-ins. That I left a kind of stillness others could grow into. I don't need to be spoken of often, just kindly. And if the world keeps spinning and they forget, if my name fades like chalk in rain, that's all right too, because I remember me. And I lived the ending on my own terms. I loved where I could, and I left where I had to, not because I was unkind, but because I finally learned how to be kind to myself. I still have days where I wake up and feel the pull, the old instinct to reach out, to check in, to ask if they're okay. But I sit with it now. I let it pass like a wave that no longer knocks me down. I go outside. I walk, I write. I make something warm on the stove. I listen to music from the 60s and sing to myself in a voice that's unremarkable but mine. There's no grand finale, no dramatic turn, just this quiet continuation, a life reclaimed. So if they ask about me someday, tell them this: she lived gently, then firmly. She gave until it hurt, then healed where it hurt most. She stayed soft, but she stopped shrinking, and she was finally free.